defeating our joy and thankfulness, there is one uneasy question. What about the future? What will happen now? Will we, the people who have won the war, drive home our victory against fascism by defeating our pre-war enemies of poverty and unemployment?
The 45 period came after the war and after a decade when there was very little industrial struggle, and yet people were living in the depths of a recession, a depression. That's not dissimilar to what we have now. There haven't been major industrial struggles for some time, and yet people are suffering.
People are very much afraid of what happened after the First War or what happened after the Second, which was enormous poverty.
The period after the war, from 1945 up to 50, was an extraordinary time politically, because that's where the basis of the welfare state was founded in Britain. And there was a particular mood at the time that enabled that to happen. And it came after the horror of the war, and it came after the desperation of the 1930s and before that the 20s.
It was never again. It wasn't only never again about war, it was never again about that kind of peace, where everything was run by rich people for rich people.
When the war ended, the mood was, we're not going back to the 1930s, how are we going to solve it? We'll use the same means of organisation that we won the war with. Not that the people were filled with an ideological conviction, not at all. It was a matter of common sense.
Well, this is the birth of the National Health Service. This is Nye Bevan and the matron Anne Dolan walking from the main building down towards the gate. This said this was handing over the key of the hospital. There wasn't a key handed over, that was just the way they said the health service was born.
The thing that stands out, sounds so petty this, but we had jam scones for tea. Do you remember that? Each and every one of us. Food was still rationed. We had jam scones for tea. Oh dear God, that's marvellous.
The health service was founded. There was housing by municipalities with direct labour, so that houses were built to good standard for ordinary people. And there was a sense that we would work together.
I am not prepared to associate myself with a policy where well-to-do people can afford to build luxury homes and poor people go without homes.
The point of the film was to explore that mood, not a general history. I mean, that's the 10-part series for that. This is just one collection of memories and a sense of what people wanted to achieve, however vaguely, what their spirit was at the time.
The atmosphere wasn't quite the same this year. For the first time, the management was invited. For this was the first Durham rally since the pits were handed over to the people, and coal board representatives took part in the celebrations.
The mines were now owned by the people and run for and on behalf of the people. The elderly miners, obviously, it was their utopia. They'd been promised this since 1919.
I've made documentaries in desperate times, really. We did some documentaries in the 80s for Central Television when found it very difficult to get feature films made. And as you say, they largely were banned by Channel 4 and various other guardians of the nation's politics, so they got banned. But they were made out of desperation. I mean, it was during the Thatcher onslaught when there was no voices were being raised against it. Lots at grassroots level, but nothing in the public discourse. They kept off any mention of the police brutality to the miners. They followed a pro-government agenda. People who could tell the opposite story were just not allowed on, and we were telling that opposite story. That was straight political censorship. Now, the fact that I had a known position shouldn't affect that. It shouldn't affect their objective judgment about whether that point of view should be heard in an open democracy. It wasn't allowed to be heard, and that's what I think made us very upset.
Along came Thatcher, and suddenly it was all about the individual.
The idea of socialism is weak in this country, and the idea of capitalism is very strong.
It seemed particularly apposite when the cult of the individual and the neoliberal project has failed so drastically and so catastrophically across Europe, that it's worth remembering the time when there was a different mood, a different ambition.
One day, I think, the dream will become a reality and we will be able to take real control of our own lives.
The older generation has got an absolute duty to come forward and join with young people and start talking about what was the vision in 1945.
I remember when I was younger hearing those great radio programs, radio ballads, where you would just have a collage of voices and sounds, and through that pattern the story would emerge. One memory followed by another memory, followed by maybe a contradictory one, followed by a song, followed by a bit of archive sound, and that was the style of the film we wanted to do, so that the story emerges through memories and through the archive footage, because in a sense that you can't argue with that. I mean, people say, well, you can get different people to have different memories. Yes, of course you can, but for these people, that is what they remembered and that's what they experienced. So in a sense, it's a resource for the future, I hope.